Good morning and welcome to Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club. This is the place where we explore the newest ideas in business and technology and have the chance to pose questions to the disruptors themselves. So this series is called From Entrepreneur to Enterprise, and it's all about learning how to think like an entrepreneur. And in today's uncertain climate, the ability to notice gaps in a market and pivot a product or service is vital for survival, no matter how large the organization. In this series, we're exploring what organizations of all sizes can learn from entrepreneurs, from how they think and how they problem solve in particular. So we launched the Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club at the beginning of lockdown to create a forum for people to listen to experts and disruptors, share their stories, but also to ask them the biggest questions on the topic. So please do submit any questions you have via the special Q&A box. So to this morning's disruptor, we're looking at pivot your product, and we're delighted to have Ben Legg, seasoned technology CEO and startup mentor, joining us this morning. So Ben is a globe-trotting CEO and unicorn builder. He's run operations at household names such as Coca-Cola and Google, but now uses his global experience and knowledge to advance the aims of ambitious entrepreneurs who are as passionate as he is about reinventing industries through digital technology. Ben, it's really great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining.
Good to be here.
Fantastic. So we talked about pivoting not long ago, but it'd be really good to pick up on I guess where you're at the moment and some of the projects that you are working on. For all of those listening, I would really encourage you, just pop any questions you have into the Q&A box and we'll come to those later on. So Ben, I think let's get started because I know we've got a bit to discuss. Can you tell us just a bit about the different projects that you're working on and are involved in at the moment?
Sure. So I do a lot of stuff. So I have what's called a portfolio career. But if I break the buckets of stuff I'm focused on now into two things, the first one is my own portfolio career, which primarily is mentoring startup CEOs. And when I say startup, anything up to a few years old and maybe, tens of millions in revenue, but not kind of multi-billion companies. Focused in a variety of sectors, including healthcare, education, future of work, and mobility would be the main four. So what that means is I kind of sit on a few boards. I've got a few consulting roles. I've got a few just pure mentoring roles, etc. And it's working very well right now because almost all startups during the last 6 months have either tripled in size or had to pivot to survive. And therefore the need for mentors has been pretty high. The second thing that I'm involved in, which is now about half my time, is I formed a company during lockdown called the Portfolio Collective. And this is it's like a version of LinkedIn for portfolio professionals. So all the forecasts suggest that professionals over the next few years will, up to 50%, will not have one single full-time job. They'll have a portfolio of work. And yet there's no organization out there really helping people do that successfully. So basically I've formed an organization which is going to be a mixture of community, database, training, networking, job boards, etc., that basically helps portfolio professionals get set up and then keep growing and improving.
Okay, that's fantastic. Just to ask about portfolio careers, because I think this will be of great interest to many people. So it looks like a large section of the workforce will be working like this, whether they intend to or not, and it could become the norm. What are some of the reasons why you think this trend is growing in your view?
So there's both. First of all, it's a very long-term trend. It's accelerated by coronavirus, as a lot of things have been accelerated. But if you think, go back to the 1950s or 60s, where people had a job for life and worked forever, it was because it was very hard to find talent. And everyone got promoted from within, and companies couldn't really codify what they did, and therefore you needed lots of insider knowledge, and it was hard to trust people because there were lots of transactions in cash, and it was hard to monitor quality. So long-term relationships and trust really mattered. But as cash has disappeared, as ways to monitor quality have improved, as ways to find talent and find jobs have improved, there's been less and less need for the jobs for life. So if you think about the evolution, it went from jobs for life to jobs for a few years at a time. Then you had things like the growth of consulting and specialist lawyers and specialist accountants and specialist videographers and logo builders, etc. So it's been going on for a while. So in many ways, it's just an acceleration of companies don't need to employ everyone that does the work for them. They need to employ a core bunch of people who stitch it all together, but an enormous amount can be outsourced. And with every improvement in technology, you can outsource more and more. The reason it's accelerating right now is big companies are trying to reduce their permanent headcount because it prevents flexibility, it's a massive financial risk, etc. But in parallel, it just makes more sense to outsource. With everyone working from home, why do you need to hire people in your own town? Why don't you hire people from the other side of the world if they've got the talent? Why not shop around for people with the right skills rather than take whoever walks through the door? If you need to move fast, you can hire talent if they're basically freelancers instantly, as opposed to waiting 3 to 6 months to hire a permanent employee. So it drives a mixture of, you can get better experts faster, often at a great rate, with very little corporate risk by outsourcing.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. I think we'll definitely return to this, because this, as you say, is a macro trend within the future of work, and it's certainly of interest to a lot of people. But before we come back to that, just want to focus on pivoting, because we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but clearly over the past few months, a lot of businesses have been doing this.
Yeah.
So to go back to your experience, and I know that you've done this a few times, and I think probably have the scars to prove it. Yeah. But what does pivoting actually mean?
Yeah, and so at its heart, it's a sharp and meaningful change in direction. Now it might be strategy or it might be execution, but it basically means that polishing and fine-tuning the way you do things now is not enough, and you need to do something bigger. You need to maybe have a change in direction, maybe totally change who your customers are, maybe decide to either outsource or in-house something that used to be the other way around. It could be that you shut down certain countries or focus on others. It could be go from free to play to paid or vice versa. But it's kind of something really meaningful that changes probably priorities, org structure, pricing, probably involves some risk, but ultimately you believe it's a better thing to do than to basically incremental tweak what you're doing now.
So it's interesting, because I think the word pivot has been thrown around a lot over the past few months. When you actually look at it from that perspective, it's a very difficult thing to do. Any sharp change in direction is got to be pretty uncomfortable. So how do you know when you need to do it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons, and you need to always have your antennae up for, do I need to pivot? It might be a loss of momentum. Let's face it, most companies start slowing down long before they implode. So can you spot something that's a slowdown and say, this isn't just seasonal. This isn't something that's going to bounce back. This is structural, and it's the warning sign, we need to do something meaningful about it. It might be losing faith. Top executives are leaving because they say, I just don't see a future here. Investors are refusing to invest or selling stock because they say, I don't see the future, or there's too much risk here. Or it could just be really obvious changes in, the macro environment. Obviously retail would be an example right now where it's like, people aren't going to shops. So, live with it, work out a new plan. And I'm being simplistic, but in essence, there are some cash, it's just not coming back. So, get over it and work out a new plan. So there are some, macro changes that are just going to make you pivot whether you like it or not. But I think that the more subtle ones are the ones where you need to realize you need to pivot, and nothing's punching you in the face. No one's forcing you to pivot, but you need to sort of wake up, smell the coffee, and pivot before circumstances get worse.
And in terms of larger organizations then, I mean, is it typically more difficult to do this, to execute a pivot, and how might a larger organization go about it?
Yeah. So of course, all change is more difficult in a large organization because there's more people involved, more customers, more product, more capital, or capital decisions are bigger, etc. I think the first thing you need to do is decide to pivot. Just recognize with the leadership team, what we're doing now won't work, and polishing what we're doing now won't work either. So we need something radical. Just by doing that, it's like pivoting is the only option. So then it's a case of what is the right pivot. But it's a good mental framework to say, we need to pivot. We can't just stay in our cozy corner offices and hope for the best. We will be pivoting. Let's work out the right one. Then it's kind of, you know, the usual kind of planning and thought processes, albeit normally more accelerated, which is what would success look like? You know, what are, you know, just doing a good job of defining what is the actual problem, what is the desired end state, or much more likely potential desired end states. What's the right path from A to B, which is the right end state, what's the right way to get there, and just mapping that out in enough detail that people can say, I get it, that's a better plan than what we're on now. I can, roughly speaking, work out my role, and I believe in the future. Yeah, and it's important to say, I 100% believe in the future. You don't have to have all the detail for the plan to get to the future. A lot of that you're going to work out along the journey, but you've got to say, fundamentally, you know, customers still need X product or service. You know, I believe we can be the best at that in this niche, you know, with these providers. I realize that the key success factors are these three things. I believe we can build those three things. Okay, good. That future is a good future. It's a sustainable one. It's an exciting one. And then you start working out the plan, and quite frankly, just get started, you know, as opposed to work it all out in one go. If you know what you're going to do, you know, for roughly speaking, for the next 90 days and in detail for the next week or two, you know, just get started and work it out from there. Okay.
And I guess at the moment, there are a lot of signals that are, well, they're not necessarily hard to read, but they don't look good. So I think finding opportunity when there are a lot of market signals that you know aren't great. How do you deal with that? That must take quite a bit of mental resilience as a leader to pick your way through essentially some difficult times. So any sort of advice?
And I guess I'm lucky that I'm not working for an incumbent company right now. All I see is opportunity everywhere. Every single industry is being turned on its head. People are changing behavior left, right, and center. All I see is opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. It's like healthcare is being turned on its head. There's a backlog for everything. Any company that can help the NHS or other healthcare providers get through that backlog, you know, can make a killing. Education is being turned on its head. Everyone's realized that remote actually can be pretty good if you do it right, especially for older kids and for students. That means a lot of universities are going to get shut down, but it also means there's going to be all sorts of opportunities for lifelong learning for adults, and all sorts of opportunities for great remote educational tools. You know, I go on and you name an industry, all you need to do is say, what's the behavior going from and to, and just aim for the two. So it's really, really exciting time, I think. If you like change and you like you know, thinking about a better future, now's the best time in my life that I can think of, because the future is coming to us 5 or 10 years faster than it was.
Fantastic. I mean, thinking about large organizations then and back to them, what stops them from pivoting effectively? Because, you know, clearly you are used to and very tuned in and experienced in looking for opportunities. It's something that really motivates you. In a larger organization, perhaps some different dynamics there, I don't know.
Yeah, really, a company that doesn't pivot when it should, it's lack of leadership, and it starts at the top. It's maybe incremental thinkers at the top, maybe people who are clinging to the status quo and hoping they can hang in there before they get fired or resign or whatever. At the slightly lower levels, it's probably, that's above my pay grade. I'll keep doing what I'm doing until someone else tells me to pivot. For a lot of people, it's just hard to see the entire big picture from end to end, because, you know, big companies are complicated. But ultimately, decisions to pivot, you know, should happen at the C level, you know, whether it's a CEO or, you know, a senior functional leader or an MD of a business unit, but basically someone who can see the big picture, smell the warning signs, and say, we need to pivot, let's get started. But as I say, below that, you know, there's a lot of people just keeping their heads down and hoping for the best and thinking, I hope it's not me that gets made redundant next. It's not a healthy attitude. Really, you need to build an organization which everyone cares and everyone's trying to build that future.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of innovation, I mean, it seems to go without saying that pivots are going to be successful in organizations with strong cultures of organization, but again, of innovation, sorry, but not everybody has that. I mean, how does pivoting relate to innovation in general, in your view?
So, and obviously it's enormous. A pivot involves, you can't pivot without innovation. Now, by the way, most innovations can be stolen as opposed to invented. You know, I would say most of the successful pivots I've seen have been 90% stealing ideas from somewhere else and 10%, you know, internal idea generation. But stealing the right ideas and stitching them together in the right way, you know, is the skill there. But I think, again, once you've made that decision to pivot, it kind of forces innovation, because what I found ages ago when I was at Coca-Cola, we were really looking into how do we spread innovation, how do we spread best practice, etc. And companies have databases and they have best practice forums, etc. And it achieves virtually nothing. We found the biggest way to do it was to give people jobs they didn't know how to achieve, and then they would go out and seek new information and new ways of doing things. And then we just need to make sure that was easy to find. And I think with the pivot, it's the same thing. Give people a future. Tell them that we're going there and there is no turning back. Burn the boats, as it were. And say, right, work it out. And I'm here to help. And we're going to sort of make a few mistakes along the way. But in essence, just start moving in the right direction. Measure often. Fine tune the path often. But it comes back to that. We're going to do it even if we don't know all the details of the plan.
Okay. What's the most effective pivot you've seen recently?
So recently, a couple of, let's say, large startups that I worked with, so both kind of 50-ish people, have made very cool pivots. So one that I'm working with is called the Webinar Vet. So pre-lockdown, they were a professional development organization for vets. So basically, it does what it says in the tin. Vets who didn't want to pay a fortune and go to in-person training for their continuous professional development could do webinars instead. And they were a membership organization. You paid a monthly fee, you attended webinars. They used to turn up to conferences, but organized by someone else. With lockdown, pretty much all the veterinary conferences in the world were canceled. And the team went out pitching to all the conference organizers saying, how about we run your conference for you virtually? Their conference revenue is now about 5 times bigger than their training revenue. So they've grown like crazy during lockdown. So who said there's no money in conferences? You just got to do the right kind of conferences, i.e. virtual. Another that I sit on the board of is called Mrs. Wordsmith. It's an education company. Started off doing educational flashcards for kids to learn to read and spell and think that kind of thing. Moved into books, has some apps under development, but not quite ready. But during lockdown, realized that with kids all sent home, they would need to be A, kept busy by parents who were trying to work from home, but B, needed more education materials that were different to the classroom. So we basically turned all our materials with some tweaking into downloadable, printable worksheets. And first of all, that's a 100% margin business. When you sell a book, it's about 40% margin. When you sell a downloadable, it's 100% margin. And that business is now twice the size of the print business. And it was only invented about 3 months ago. And to the point where it's virtually funding the entire engineering team for the apps. So where there was a risk of a cash crunch, we've basically, I wouldn't say quite sailed through the lockdown, but had a pretty healthy pivot during a lockdown to come up with a whole load of new products that no one had thought of before lockdown.
I mean, in terms of the behavior change there, you believe and have seen that is a sustained behavior change. Why do you think it is? Because there'll be some skepticism about that, I think. What's your view?
Why did both companies pivot? I guess they're not scared of the unknown. So, the Webinar Vet, they were running training webinars, like here, how do you, I don't know, dissect a dog or whatever it is that they do. Vets, I mean, high respect for vets, but I don't know what their training involves. How do you, pull out a bad claw of a dog or whatever it might be. But they said, well, running a conference, running a training course, it doesn't sound too big a change. It turns out it's a massive change, but they jumped in feet first and said, we'll probably do a better job than everyone else. And, people are struggling, so why not give it a try? With Mrs. Wordsmith, they were in a good position. They had a brand associated with education and they had a whole load of great content. But they just said, okay, what's going on with kids? They're stuck at home. Parents want to keep them busy. They don't want them playing pointless games. They'd rather they're doing something educational. Teachers are struggling for materials. Let's just, effectively create awesome worksheets and categorize them by age and whatever it might be. Why do they do it? A little bit right place, right time, but a little bit just saying, education's changed a bit. What's the problem here? If you think about it, any educational publisher could have done it, but only one did. So all the rest were, I guess, burying their head in the sand or something like that.
And very comfortable, I guess, with the current situation. Thinking about, so one last question. I mean, before, I think it'd be interesting to touch on the future of work and mobility as well, because they're the other two areas that you highlighted. But before that, I mean, the biggest what is this the biggest barrier to pivoting successfully? I mean, what, if there's one thing that people in organizations, you just think, keep this top of mind.
Yeah. So it's really that inaction and delays kill. So too many big organizations will say, oh, a pivot's risky. Let's think some more. Let's plan some more. Let's get McKinsey in. Nothing wrong with McKinsey. I used to work there, but let's take our time. Let's think, plan. And you lose 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, by which time consumer behaviors changed and they've found someone else to buy products and services from. So delays kill, just as much as launching into a plan where you don't have all the answers. So it really is just move faster. Just make the decision. Definitely decide, put a bit of time and effort into where you want to be and what the first step is, and have some pretty good ideas of step 2 and 3, but you can work out steps 2 and 3 while you're implementing step 1.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So to go back to kind of the where we started, which is about people and some of the skills that they have, and to think about portfolio careers. Is there a particular personality type that you've noticed who make successful portfolio careers? Are there any sort of common themes that you've come across thus far?
So there's both diversity and commonality. So if I start with diversity, because it's really interesting, I think a lot of people think portfolio careers are maybe like ex-CEOs who do board jobs and stuff, or maybe the creative types, journalists, writers, videographers. They've always had a large kind of freelance portfolio career element. But of our 70 founder members, we've got architects, we've got vets, we've got accountants, solicitors, a lot of creative types. We've got physiotherapists, physical trainers. What else do we have? It's almost like you name a profession, and we've got a few of them, having portfolio careers. So the diversity is just really cool. That's diversity. I think in terms of what they have in common, most of them that we're seeing come our way are over 30. I think there's an element with the younger people if they feel they need to learn from others. And it's also, quite frankly, university doesn't prepare people for a portfolio career, which is a big failing there. But there's a lack of confidence to be a really good portfolio professional, you generally need to try and be the best at something. And I think most people in their 20s are still working out where are their passions, what can they be the best at. So it's a problem we do intend to try and solve at some stages. How do we help people accelerate themselves into a portfolio career? And we've seen a few examples, but the majority of people coming to us are in their 30s or more, or 40s, 50s as well, but over 30. It's even gender split, but on balance, the industry suggests that there's more women in portfolio careers. I think it probably fits well with family life and stuff like that. Other things that people have in common, probably the personality traits are the things that go well. So to be a portfolio professional, you do need to be a bit entrepreneurial. You need to kick your own ass every morning, as well, excuse my French. You need to be relatively comfortable that you can learn new skills fast. So as a portfolio professional, you're a company of one. So you need to be like a CEO and a head of strategy, like, what am I going to do with this company of one? You need to be your own marketer, make your own website. It can just be a one-page one. You need to do your own sales. How do you do outreach? You need to do your own execution, your own customer service. So people need to be, there's a generalist set of skills that people can't be scared of. People who are scared of selling, would find it hard. What I would say is there are techniques for everything, and you can create inbound needs, but that kind of curiosity, confidence, in general, everyone coming our way is digitally confident. Like, you need to build a website. Okay, fine. I'll open up Wix and I'll make a website. It's not kind of, oh, I can't do that. So people who are not capable of teaching themselves won't make good portfolio career professionals. But that said, big companies don't really want to keep those people because they're not the ones that will help them pivot. So I think anyone that can't teach themselves new skills will be in trouble anyway. What else? Flexible. So the reality in a portfolio career is what pays your bills now may not be what pays your bills in a month, in a year rather, or 2 years, because it might get commoditized. And so there's still work, but at a lower rate, or it might go away. So, for example, a few years ago, one of the highest paid types of engineer was HTML for making websites. Now there are so many templates for making websites, it's actually one of the lowest paid of the engineering skills. Right now, really hot is grant applications. The biggest source of funds for a lot of companies is government grants. So actually it's booming right now. So it's kind of, things change. And I think as a portfolio professional, you need to keep saying, where's the wind blowing? Where will there be more demand? and what unique skills can I build that will sort of keep my hourly rate, day rate high, etc. So yeah, it's kind of like a one-person entrepreneur, not scared of much, digitally savvy, typically over 30, although there's no rule for that, but that would be it. But pretty diverse beyond that.
Do you think that the government, for example, in the UK economy understands this trend and is actually helping to accelerate it? Because I have heard that, for example, the taxman doesn't really look so favorably on the, for example, on these type of careers. So what's your view on maybe what, more broadly speaking, the government needs to do to sort of help, I think, fuel this trend?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't think the government fully understands. The Inland Revenue kind of does, actually. So one of the advantages of a portfolio career traditionally was you pay less tax. That's being squeezed. So I think it's still, you will pay less tax because you can offset more expenses and the tax rates are slightly lower, but it used to be like 19% and it's starting to go up pretty fast. So they're zooming on that. So they know how to take money from these people, but how to stimulate this part of the economy, I think they're missing a trick completely. If you think about it, and primarily what I'm focused on is the professional end of the gig economy. So, there's obviously two ends, and one end there are commoditized skills like, say, driving, but I'm mainly working with people who don't want to be commoditized. They want to earn great, rates, etc. But let's say UK unemployment's heading for a 5 million. I think it's safe to say that at least 1 million of those people are professionals who could have a successful portfolio career and will not be finding a permanent job in the next 12 to 24 months, if ever. So, if I was the government, I'd be all over this as a problem to solve, because in essence, they can both, generate more taxes and pay less unemployment benefits and, create a lot less misery just by really encouraging this trend.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very interesting time. I mean, certainly the future of work, I mean, it's been absolutely disrupted, and calling it the future of work is one thing, because as you say, it's come to us today. One last sector that you mentioned just before, before any sort of further questions and before we wrap up, is around mobility, which is another area of interest for you. Just sort of, can you give a brief flavour of, I guess, what some of the changes are in that sector and why it's so interesting at the moment?
Yeah, so some of the trends are things that were happening anyway, been accelerated, but like a lot of things, coronavirus, obviously there's one big thing that no one anticipated, which is the drop in public transport. Although all my beliefs are when there's a vaccine, that will come back. So I think that's a temporary blip. But there was already a move away from car ownership, a move towards cycling, a move towards walking, etc. So some of the things I've been involved in during lockdown, one is working with an electric bike company. Cycling has boomed, during the last 6 months. Bike sales grew by something like 50 or 60%, but mainly because they ran out of stock. They probably could have grown over 100% in the last 6 months. But I think if you start extrapolating that, clearly a lot of people are going to want to stay on bikes and stay off public transport, etc., for the next few years. But also a lot of cities, and I was lucky when I worked at Ola, I got to meet a lot of mayors around the UK. A lot of cities were already saying, I want to pedestrianize the city centre, I want to have more cycle lanes, less cars, etc. Now is the perfect opportunity. Roads are quieter, so it's a good time to rip them up and do something else with them. Cycling is massive. So I think what's fascinating me is not just the future of mobility, it's the future of cities. So in London already, there's quite a few streets being closed down so that restaurants can spill into the streets. I hope that becomes permanent. Plant some trees, ban cars, and have more and more like mini villages scattered around cities. That would be amazing. I think cycling, get more cycling lanes, more charging, more infrastructure, etc., for electric bikes. Anyone who cycles around a lot, especially in the summer, will know that it's horrible turning up somewhere sweaty. So I think it's one of the reasons electric bikes do as well. And I love exercise, but turning up sweaty is not my thing. So I think this whole what is the future of the city is kind of really, really fascinating. Obviously, another big one, and I don't know all the answers here, but clearly flying has tanked fast. Again, a bit like public transport, I think tourism will probably rebound fast as is the vaccine, but business travel could well be down forever. Because companies have realized that you can actually do business without going. I've just, with the portfolio collective, I've hired 15 people without meeting any of them. And you can do that. And people have realized they can build business without going to conferences, or they can do virtual conferences. So I'm sure it will come back a bit. but will it ever get back to more than 30 to 50% of what it used to be? I don't know. And obviously that does have other knock-ons, like, you know, high-end hotels will struggle a bit because there's less business travelers. Airlines often made all their money or most of their money from business travel. That's going to be hit. So there's a whole load of knock-on effects from that, which is good and bad. It's good for the environment. It may be bad for some travel companies, but that's going to be interesting. And then just coming back to the future of cities, I think cities are going to be rearranged in a lot of ways. So my brother actually runs a letting agency in Tunbridge Wells. He said prices are up 30% since lockdown began. People are moving out of London and out of big cities. So is there a scenario over the next few years in which, I don't know, 3, 4, 5% of people leave London, but on top of that, a whole load of offices are converted into residential. Prices drop, would be amazing for me and everyone else who lives in London. But also streets start getting shut down and turned into little sort of, you know, villagey areas, and cities end up becoming a bit more rural and a bit more leisurely, a bit more affordable. You know, I could see, other than if you're a landlord, which would be a bad time to be a landlord, but cities could become a lot more civilized and leisurely than they were in the past.
Which sounds like some kind of utopia, actually. Out of the way you've described it, I'm very much bought into that. Brilliant. I mean, thank you so much for that, because, you know, we've covered a lot of ground as usual, but I think, you know, clearly there are, as you pointed out, there are a lot of opportunities at the moment. I mean, what is sort of one last thing? What would you say to people who, you know, they've got lots of ideas, they kind of want to make these moves, you know, but they don't really know how to carry them out, or they don't sort of feel like they have the resources to? Any advice for them? So
a couple of things. Number one is I run a weekly workshop. Ping me on LinkedIn, and it is £25, but anyone that asks, I give them a code. We just charge so that we can run some ads and afford them. So yeah, ping me, I'll give you a code. It's Wednesdays at 4 p.m. The other is, if you're not even ready for that, start a side hustle now. I think everyone should have a side hustle, some kind of sideline, might be just a few hours a week, in which you do something valuable that you enjoy, you make some money, and it just helps you understand, how do I win business? How much can I charge? How should I organize my taxes? Do I need a website? What do I say on LinkedIn? But you start getting prepared for a portfolio career. Now, if you never need it, fine, you're just earning some extra money. You can't argue with that. If you do need it, you'll be 10 times readier than if you don't have a side hustle.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's very pragmatic advice. I think, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and really excited for your new projects. And I think, you know, I wish you every success with that, and be really interesting to see, again, in another 6 months to a year's time, what on earth has happened in the world with work. So thank you so much to you.
A pleasure.